Good day folks, the Pro Audio Journalist here. Today we are doing a shootout between the Lindell Audio 7X500 versus the Lindell Audio 7X500VIN, VIN, both of which are 1176 style FET compressors for 500 series power supplies. The VIN is short for vintage, and its title refers to the different op-amp used in the unit, which is a 1731 type op-amp circuit. If you've ever wondered what difference an op-amp can make to the final sound, this shootout is a great example of how much difference they contribute. It's a rather dramatic, noticeable difference. In my comments, I will refer to each unit as either vintage or original. Original being the copper coloured unit that was released initially, and vintage referring to the 7X500VIN. I will give my opinion after each sound example. First up, we have mono drums, just to give you an idea of overall character on percussive elements. I'll play the unprocessed audio initially, and then play the processed audio with visuals to display which unit is being used. Okay, both units sound great and have their own character. I'm still getting used to YouTube audio, so I volume match these decently, but I'm more wanting you to listen for texture and behavior and ambience, that sort of thing. I don't really like the word color used to describe audio, but I tend to rather use textural adjectives. But yes, both units sound great and have their own character. The vintage unit really coats the sound in a soft, pillowy character. It's the saturation. In some instances, it actually sounds more like a tube unit rather than a solid state unit. However, it does have some of that cut and edge normally associated with the solid state unit. It surprises me that it can still sound so punchy despite the dose of saturation. But that's the fun of this unit. It treats the transients with respect while controlling them, and some 1176s on the market don't do that. Some units you just end up with a brick-walled, crushed, distorted mess. If you're a fan of the channel, you know what unit I'm talking about. But sadly they're not alone. I'm all for crushing sources and getting heavy-handed with the compressor, but some do it better than others in my opinion. Even though the vintage unit has less definition than the original copper version, it feels considered and purposeful. I would describe it as an edgy plush sound compared to the more hi-fi original copper unit. In this example, the vintage unit seems to cushion the kick in a pillowy kind of way. It really hugs the audio. In comparison, the original copper version feels very open, more hi-fi sounding, maybe a touch more high-end, but I don't think that's the full story. I really believe Tobias did a great job deciding on the sonics of these units, especially the gold copper unit. It sounds really spacious and fills the stereo field with nuances, an attribute I tend to associate with more expensive units. The original copper unit is the kind of 1176 I'd reach for on drums if I was doing, say, a Peter Gabriel record. It really sounds expensive, and that's worth noting considering the price tag. It doesn't have as much weight as the vintage version, but it makes up for it with punch and focus. It really respects the transients nicely. In this example, it seems to put everything in its own space. The high end is really pleasant to me. It has the cut without sounding harsh. The op-amp and transformers are a great combination, it seems. Now we'll get on to individual percussive elements. We'll do kick and snare. We'll do kick first. Okay, I'll keep this short because obviously there's a lot of similarities between the mono drums that we listened to first. But on kick, both units added a perceived increase in energy level. The vintage version does sound distinctly vintage with more analog artifacts. Both units do have a similar quality character really. However, it feels like there's just more of that character in the vintage version. Very obviously, the op-amps do have a dramatic effect on the sound. Again, the copper unit sounds more hi-fi with more clarity and cut, and the vintage unit has more of a pillowy effect while still retaining the punch. Both units do seem to hug the audio in a way that makes them feel higher quality when compared to the original unprocessed track. There is definitely more weight in the vintage version. However, the copper version, the original copper version, seems to still bring a glorious focused punch to the sound. On snare, both units retain the punch and roll the snare into a ball of energy, which some cheaper 1176s crumble in this sort of test. They both add a real thwack to the snare. Again, this is a quality that some poorly designed 1176s don't possess on drums. It's impressive considering how much I'm compressing in this example. Both units are reducing around 12 dB. Both units are saturating, especially around the fundamental of the note. The vintage unit has a noticeably more saturation and vintage vibe to the sound that adds weight and energy to the snare. The original copper version has more cut, more clarity, and has a more open hi-fi sound in comparison. The original copper version does feel like it fills the stereo field with a defined ambience and punch. Both units sound really impactful and increase the perceived energy level very nicely. After much experimentation with these units over a long period of time, I've found that they are very suited to snare drum, especially in a mix. They pull the energy from the snare and can also sit it in the mix really nicely. It also works very well in conjunction with your mix bus compressor, I've found. Okay, next up we'll do bass. Okay, on bass, both units have a definite character, and both units sound amazing to me. I believe these units really shine on bass, and guitars for that matter. The vintage version adds a higher perceived energy level, and it feels as though it's at the brink, which adds excitement. It has such a great low-end energy. It massages the bass into a ball of energy that is easily placed in a mix. Dynamically, they're both what you'd expect from a good 1176, and the vintage version has a bit of a raggedy, edgy vibe. If I was reaching for an 1176 on bass, on say a typical Nirvana song, I would definitely be reaching for the vintage unit. It sounds really big and punchy, with a bit of a gooey vibe going on. The original copper version feels more refined, especially in the upper mids. It does sound more hi-fi in this comparison. I would reach for the original copper unit on bass if I was doing a really polished hi-fi sounding track, like a polished Nickelback production or a Metallica Black Album type polishing. It really electrifies the signal, giving it strength. It sounds robust and feels like it has plenty to give. An absolute secret weapon on bass I've found in mixes that have come in recently. It just seems to set it in the mix perfectly, and it does roll that low end into a nice ball of energy that just sits in your phantom center so perfectly.
I've got the world on my shoulders, every labored breath, the wind in our sails, but they're rolling us steady. I've got the world on my shoulders, every labored breath, the wind in our sails, but they're rolling us steady. I've got the world on my shoulders, every labored breath, the wind in our sails, but they're rolling us steady.
Okay guys, on vocals, it's my opinion that both units have a finished record sound. All along my belief was that the vintage unit would best be suited for projects where you want things to sound dirty and controlled. And now I'm asking myself the question of whether I would use the vintage unit on a vocal in a clean hi-fi sounding mix. And I believe in some instances I would. Also, in most of my projects I generally use two 1176s in series to control the vocal to my satisfaction. Surprisingly, both LINDELL units seem to pin down the vocal well on their own with only one unit. Even looking at the resulted waveform is evidence that these compressors really pin things down extremely well. In these examples, I think we are compressing between 10 to 15 decibels gain reduction, and if I was using them in a mix I would probably compress them even more than that. The units have plenty left to give without destroying definition. The examples of each unit show that the vocal delivery is fast and the true texture of the saturation comes out on the long-held notes of the singer. The vintage unit sounds a bit like overdriving an API preamp in my opinion. However, it sounds a bit smoother than that. If you want that sound, I'd be getting it from the LINDELL unit rather than overdriving the preamp, as it's a higher quality result. The original copper unit has so much definition, and I believe it could be used on vocals in a lot of different projects. It's just a quality sound. It could be used in a hi-fi sounding mix, no problem at all. The audio examples pretty much speak for themselves here, and it's obvious that these can produce a high quality vocal sound if you tweak them a little. Totally worth the price. In summary, if you want an overdriven vocal, the LINDELL vintage unit will do it, especially if you want something vibey that still has a quality to it. The original copper unit is just so usable on vocals, it would suit a variety of genres and projects. Also, I believe these op amps are interchangeable too, so you can mod your compressor if your heart desires, and I've already got the desire to do so. I believe that JLM Audio have a Hardy 990 op amp that would fit this pin orientation, so I would be able to put it into either of the units. These op amps are really known for a clean response. I'm on a bit of a journey to find an 1176 that's extremely clean, and I'm wondering if this is a way to do it. I believe that rap and pop vocals are getting cleaner, they are cleaner. I think people are using the CL1B a lot, and that's a lot cleaner than what people used to use, which was always an 1176. My goal is to have at least 6 of these Lindell compressors in my rack, each pair with a different op amp for a big tonal palette to choose from. The only thing I don't like about these units is they don't have fully variable attack and release times. I'd love to see a Mark II version with this improvement. However, I do really love the fixed attack and release times that they have picked. It really covers a lot of bases. I just prefer to be able to set the release to the timing of the track sometimes. Okay guys, just to repeat myself, my verdict is buy a pair of each, and I believe that you will use them in your studio. And there's such little money that, you know, why wouldn't you have a go and see how they sound? Okay guys, I'm the Pro Audio Journalist. Please like and subscribe, and give me some comments on the format of this video, whether you like the format that I used. Do you like the notes in between the examples, or would you rather I just did all the examples and have a chat at the end, you know, maybe at the beginning and the end? Yeah, I'm sort of battling YouTube audio a bit because it just sounds different on YouTube. The compression or whatever's going on, the limiting, does affect sound, so getting it up to the right volume without using limiting is very hard. Honestly, it does affect the sound just a tiny bit, but you still get to hear the character of the units anyway. Okay guys, I'm the Pro Audio Journalist. I'll see you in the next one.